Have you ever experienced that moment when you unboxed your new graphics card and met with the scent of fresh silicon mixed with the promise of glorious FPS, only to later discover that you actually purchased a subpar low-budget potato and you were totally fine with that? Well, this video will be similar to that experience. The question of whether an old budget CPU can run modern games is just circumstantial. So, initially the main topic of this video was about AMD's R7 260X from 2013 and whether it can keep it up in 2024. And if you think about it, it is amazing how much the gaming landscape has changed since when this card first hit the market. You know, we've gone from 720 and 1080p being like the gold standard to 4K and even 8K becoming more and more common. On from
thing in there, it's in this beautiful
to
the more GPUs you buy, the more money you save.
And all these new graphics cards with dozens of gigabytes of VRAM. Oh man, it makes the 2 gigabytes of the R7 260X look tiny. Moreover, expecting this card to run modern games is like expecting a rotary phone to handle Android apps. Freaking AI jokes. But before we validate whether the above statement is warranted or not, I have to break down why video memory, also known VRAM, is such a big deal, especially nowadays. So think of it this way. Games are basically giant digital worlds, right? Every detail, from the textures on a character's skin to the leaves on a tree, takes up memory. As the display resolution have increased with the time, and games have become more visually complex, those textures and environments have become much larger and more detailed. All of this requires more and more VRAM. So, when a graphics card runs out of VRAM, it has to start swapping data back and forth with the system's slower memory. And that's what basically causes those frustrating stutters and frame drops, or in some cases, results in complete crashes. Take, for example, Alan Wake 2, which, whenever I tested with the R7 260X, crashed to the desktop after the intro cutscene. And that is a pretty clear indicator of a growing trend that newer games are increasingly becoming incompatible with this kind of old hardware. But here where things get a bit interesting. The fact that games such as Alan Wake 2 or Black Myth Wukong were even able to boot proves that the R7 260X is DirectX 12 certified after all, and that's a big deal. Okay, does that mean it has a fighting chance against each and every PC game out there? Of course not. DirectX 12 certification just means that the card meets some basic technical requirements, or with other words, it can understand the language these new games are speaking, even if it struggles to keep up with the conversation. But DirectX 12, it's not the be-all and end-all of the equation. Driver support is a more crucial factor. And unfortunately, the R7 260X has not seen a driver update since 2022. Game developers tend to focus on optimizing for the latest hardware, so drivers updates for older cards often get left behind and eventually are paused indefinitely. This can lead to compatibility issues even if the card technically meets the specs on paper. The hardware might be capable of running the game, but the software/drivers just aren't there to bridge the gap. Also considering the fact that the R7 260X doesn't meet the specs for many modern video games makes matters worse. I'm pretty sure there will be at least one comment suggesting the use of modded drivers or various API translation shenanigans to run the unsupported games. But I won't bother because the card's engine is too weak to even perform half-decent in demanding titles, especially those released in 2023 or later. Therefore, it's not just about being able to launch the game, which may already seem impressive for a card like R7 260X, but at the end of the day, it is the performance that truly matters. The very recent MMO Throne and Liberty is an excellent illustration of that. Early levels, it runs as good as it gets at 1080p and 75% resolution scaling, which made the graphics very grainy. And the performance isn't exactly great, running at 46 average and 20 FPS in 1% lows. Although I could play the game under those conditions, I doubt most PC gamers will tolerate such low standards. Now, what about the games that were introduced before 2023, but are still very popular in the PC gaming community. Any surprise there? Definitely. There were a few surprises, both bad and good. For the more demanding titles, compromises were inevitable. For example, in Elden Ring, I had to lower my expectations significantly at the 720p and choose very low settings to reach a measly 35 frames per second on average and somewhere around 28 in 1% lows. Then there is Cyberpunk 2077, which to my surprise was somewhat playable, even at 1080p resolution. Walking around heavy areas such as the Cherry Blossom Market, the average FPS will stay above the high 30s, with 1% lows reaching 27 FPS. As a bonus, driving around the city produces a few more frames overall, so there is that. The only weirdness with this one was the daytime lighting. It was brightly bright, which just shows that with outdated drivers you never know what quirks you might encounter. It's part of the charm, I guess. Of course, it's not all doom and gloom for the R7 260X. So let's look at some games that performed reasonably well. Take Fortnite, for instance. If you ignore the usual glorious stutters at the beginning of every session, the R7 260X will hit a solid 90 frames on average and 49 in 1% lows running at 1080p performance mode. Kudos to the developers behind Fortnite who have definitely done a fantastic job of making the game accessible to a wide variety of computer hardware, both old and new. Now the only thing I'm curious to know is how many more years it will take them to fix those mega stutters. Similarly, Counter-Strike 2 was curious to know why I was using graphics drivers from 2022 and was asking for the installation of more recent ones, which of course I totally ignored, and guess what? The game ran just fine. Fine might be a bit stretched, but I wouldn't describe that as terrible either. At 900 resolution on the lowest settings along with the FSR 2.0 enable at ultra quality, I got frames well above the mid-70s, with 1% lows lingering around the low 50s. Also considering that the graphics quality was quite decent, and that I was running the test on the demanding ancient map, it's a testament to the fact that the R7 260X is somewhat capable of handling CS2. Here is a game that worked without any compromises. Even though GTA 5 is getting old, it is a true classic with thousands of daily concurrent players, so it isn't irrelevant to know that an outdated GPU such as 260X can pull an average of 79 FPS at 1080p optimized settings while staying well above the obligatory 60s in 1% lows. It really shows the value of older hardware for budget-conscious gamers. Finally, I decided to revisit the game that originally prompted me to buy this R7 260X back in 2013. So I have to admit two things. Path of Exile is more addictive than ever, despite the fact that it still looks like crap. Secondly, the game engine is more heavy after 11 years of constant updates and changes. That was the main reason why I was getting around 40 to 50 FPS on average, with some serious dips in performance during scenes with high number of monsters and numerous particles, explosions and other complex lighting effects. Certainly not quite smooth performance as it was back in 2013 for the R7 260X. Worth saying, for what this game is, even under this low performance, the gameplay felt quite playable to me. Just don't try to join a party with this card, you will have to take my word for it. By now I feel it's needless to say that this neglected by AMD low-budget GPU with the limited VRAM capacity is unable to deliver on the majority of titles for the last 5 years, or even on games that constantly get updated. After all, this card was already having trouble handling demand PC games when it was initially released in 2013. And that brings us to one of the most important takeaways of this video. Despite its limitations, the R7 260X is a viable option for gamers who don't have the means for something better. It's okay to appreciate what you have, to find joy in the games that your hardware is capable of running, and to find ways to make things work. That's the spirit of PC gaming after all. Tinkering with graphic settings or trying to squeeze out a bit more performance by overclocking your GPU is a path that you will eventually follow, regardless of the budget of your computer. Overclocking, for those who might be unfamiliar, is essentially pushing a component beyond its factory settings to get better performance. It is like giving your old GPU a shot of adrenaline to get free FPS. But it can be risky, especially with older hardware. Overclocking generates also more heat, and older components might not have the same thermal headroom as they used to. Speaking of the devil, the single-fan Sapphire model I tested in this video proved to be an excellent overclocker, reaching a 10 to 15% in game boost while keeping the temperatures and fan noise at acceptable levels. But overclocking isn't some magic trick that will just turn a GPU into a gaming beast. It will just give you a little more performance, and it might make you feel more appreciative about your computer yourself now that you've learned one or two things. At the end of the day, gaming is not about the specs or how many FPS your PC produces, but rather about the joy that you bring to the game. It's about connecting with people, escaping into those digital worlds, making friends and building memories. So if you are still watching, whether you are just starting out or you've been gaming since forever, don't forget to enjoy the experience. Explore all these different games out there and have fun. Here are some videos of mine that you might like to explore also.